spoke in public, I was in my own judgment too long. And I said, that's it, I'm not gonna do it again. And then on the High Holy Day, which for you non-Irish is the 17th of March, Brendan Sheehan approached me and, well, how can you say no to a guy named Brendan Sheehan on March 17th? Here I am, and I hope for your sake I don't have an attack of the lungs, but I do have one caveat that may prove beneficial to you. I've been battling, I'm sorry to bring this up, but I may need to explain a hasty exit. Diarrhea has come to visit me, and if I suddenly disappear, your good luck, not mine. Story over. But in the interim, I guess most of you just know me now as some old guy that hears asbestos cases over on the other courtroom, and there's not a lot of drama there. I mean, there is and there isn't, but there are no such thing as a small case, and the lawyers are all damn good, which of course makes my job challenging. But the TV ratings for science shows are a hell of a lot less than Law and Order and NCIS, etc. So I thought you might prefer to hear some of my experiences at my first go-around on the general division, because that's of more general interest. And besides, since my two predecessors here, my former partner Gold and Bo Willis, wanted to talk about their lives of crime, I'm guessing that that's what you'd rather hear. So you won't hear, and any of the asbestos lawyers that might have shown up from, hoping to me tell what great lawyers they were and gentlemen and gentlemen, tough. Well, how does a white male Republican get to start, as I did last month, his 30th year on the bench in Cuyahoga County? That is, a white male Republican not named McMonagle. Well, it goes back to 1976. The legislature created 4 new judgeships for Cuyahoga County, including one that Jimmy McMonagle successfully ran for. And some of those people at that time could still remember my father. Nobody in this room does, because he's been dead for 60 years, but he was a common pleas judge for 10 years, and by all reports, a damn good one. And so the Republicans were, asking if I would like to follow, especially one, Judge Harry Jaffe. We used to shop at Heinen's at Cedar and Green, and he was pestering me, "You're gonna run? You're gonna run?" And I kept putting him off, and finally I said, "No, I like what I'm doing. I'm making a decent living. I like the guys I'm practicing with. No, I'm not gonna." Okay, I thought that was the end of it. But 10 days later, I got a phone call from Harry Darmore, who was the bailiff for Roy McMahon, and said, "Hey, Harry, you've been talking to Jaff?" I said, "Well, yeah, I see him every damn Saturday. Why?" "He just bet Roy McMahon $50 that you would not be on the ballot next year." That son of a... So I went to see Bob Hughes. Now, keep in mind, the language of the bet will not be on the ballot. So I went over to talk to Bob Hughes, and I said, "You got something like the State Board of Education or some precinct committee, man, some nondescript thing that I could run for?" Because I told him the story, and he said the same thing. That son of a... And he was a friend of Jack's anyway. Well, he said, "I need a sacrificial lamb to run against Charlie Vanek for Congress." if he'd have got caught with a young boy in public square, he'd have still won 2-1. And that's what he did. He won 2-1. But afterwards, of course, 3 of the sitting judges had won elections to the Court of Appeals, or one Jonar at the probate court, so there were openings. And so I went in to talk to Bob, and I said, look, I don't think you owe me anything, but if you don't have anybody better or more deserving, I'll take one, but it's up to you, I don't care. Well, I got a call, and that's how it started. Now comes the point of how does a guy like, what male Republican get elected in Cuyahoga County? Well, within weeks of my appointment, I got assigned the Corey Moore case. Corey Moore was a young black kid, 19, who went into the Warrensville Heights police station late at night with a gun and commandeered the place. There was only a lieutenant and a young woman dispatcher on duty, and he just wanted to make a statement, I guess. And for 2 days there was a standoff there, and actually he asked to speak to President Carter, and President Carter obliged. He called the police station, put the kid on the line, and that sort of started mollifying him. And then the FBI negotiation team got in, and they managed to end the siege with no harm, no physical harm to anybody, but of course the young girl was scared to death. At any rate, he was indicted on a variety of things, obviously kidnapping, and he had taken the girl's purse, so they added armed robbery to it, and there was no plea worked out, so it went to trial. But before the trial, the defense team subpoenaed James Earl Carter. Oh, I'm a tyro. I've only been doing this for a couple of months. Jeez. Okay, we'll have a hearing. Of course, the government objected, and we have a hearing. And my good friend Stuart Mandel was in a AUSA at the time, and he was assigned the task. So he comes over, and we come out into the courtroom and say we're here on the government's motion to quash the subpoena, and representing Mr. James Earl Carter, the President of the United States, Stuart Mandel. Stuart's legs worked. Of course, I couldn't see it, but they were shaking. And all of a sudden, he can't talk. It just dawned on him what he was doing. And he finally recovered and made his motion, and we went ahead. And of course, they found him guilty and of everything. And I was talking to the jury afterwards, and one of the jurors, who was, I guess, pretty savvy, because she said, well, Judge, technically, he was guilty of armed robbery because he did take something from the girl and he did have a gun. But I hope you won't make that consecutive in the punishment aspect. I said, well, I'll certainly take that thought with me. And so now that, of course, the eyes of the world, as far as I thought, were on me, and of course the paper is screaming for blood, and everybody wants him to go away forever. And the thought occurred to me the night before, what if he was Sinn Féin or IRA? Harry. So when it came to making a decision, I took it easy on him. I didn't give him the minimum. I think it was 6 to 25, and they were concurrent. And because he was in limbo, I sent him to Mansfield, which means he gets to the board in 38 months no matter what. So, and it turns out I won the gamble because he never got into any trouble for the rest of his life and turned out to be a decent citizen. So that was the first experience. Headlines, 11 o'clock, film at 11. Right after that, there was a shooting in the Baldwin Reservoir. Some poor, insane guy thought he was back in Vietnam, and one of the policemen, William Shapiro, that was assigned the task of bringing him down, unfortunately, caught a fatal bullet. And so this guy, after having some mental problems again, he's on trial in my room. And it was assigned to me, but the lawyers thought it would be better to waive a jury and just... So we got a 3-judge panel. The ubiquitous Jaffe is on my left, and my dear friend Francis E. Sweeney's on my right. I'm in the middle because it was my case. So we start the case, and there's objection, and I looked to Francis, straight ahead. So I said, "What do you think, Frank?" "I'm a juror. You're the judge. You rule." That's the kind of help I got from my friend. Well, anyway, this guy was so crazy that even Jaffe agreed. And so he was found guilty, not guilty by reason of, and I can still see that mother's face and a tear on her cheek. But that's what the evidence called for. And sometime, not a few years later, he was in some minimum security place and he got out. And by the grace of God, one of the policemen on the case saw him at the Greyhound bus station. And the guy got into a bus before he could stop it, but he got on the phone, and of course they called my wife at home and said, "Be on the lookout." They had the Shaker Heights cops. We were still living in Shaker Heights. I hadn't sold the lawyer house in favor of the judge house yet. And the cops were there in case anything happened. Well, they caught him and sent him back to the funny farm, and that's where, he finished his days out. And that was, again, right in the same year. There's another case. Missing boy, Arthur Noski. For 4 days, it was the 5 o'clock, they didn't have 5 o'clock news then, the 6 o'clock news, the 11 o'clock news, front page of the Cleveland Press, gone but not lamented, and the Pain Dealer. And finally, after somewhere around the 5th day, the mother who, she finally admitted that what had happened is that her live-in had literally shaken this kid to death, and then disposed of the body. She didn't know where or how, so anyway, she turned on him, and he was a rising star, young doctor, and part of the story that she told, if you can believe this, but after this happened, the two of them went to bed, and they didn't go for a nap. And this came out too in the paper. So when we are trying to impanel a jury a month or so, maybe 2 later, we couldn't come close because most of the women said, "I wouldn't believe the state's witness on a stack of Bibles." And of course, all the guys said, yeah, this guy, he's guilty as hell. So after about 2 days, Charlie Laurie was the lead prosecutor, along with Don Nugent at his side, and Bobby Hanna was one of the defense lawyers. I forget who the other one. Anyway, I said, do you want to spend another week in fruitless efforts here, or shall we just move this case? We can move this to Cincinnati. They don't even know we exist down there. They wouldn't know who Arthur Notsky was or who William Cutler is. So, and they agreed. So I called my friend Bill Marcy, who was the chief judge down there. I got to know him when I was running. He was running against Ralph Locher, and I was running against Charlie Vanek. And there's two Irishmen to get their chops licked by a couple of Central Europeans because he didn't have any chance of winning at the Supreme Court over Locher, and I had less chance with Charlie Vanek. So anyway, we got to be friends during the campaign. So he had been the sitting judge down there. So I called him and said, when are you going to go on vacation, Bill? I need a courtroom. He said, August 1st, deal. So we took it down to Cincinnati, and this was really kind of the rocket ship for Don Nugent. I mean, he was a good lawyer and had a good reputation anyway, but I'm sure I haven't even told him this, but I called Joe Donahue, who was John T's right-hand man, and I said, Joe, this is none of my business, but this young man, Nugent, he really knows his case. He knows it inside and out. And I wouldn't be afraid of putting him in the first chair. It's not my business, but if it's just one friend to another, I think you might want to do this. Okay, and that's what he did, and put Michael Corrigan with him. They've been schoolmates at Ignatius in high school, and they did a great job. And the guy eventually. Well, he did. He pled, and the one interesting aspect of it is it's almost funny, but it's another one of those cases. You know, don't overplay your hand. And I forgot another about Bobby Hanna. Anyway, at the beginning of the case, I told the jury, I said, well, by the way, folks, just in case you're wondering. Mr. Hanna is not related to me. I am poor and Irish, and he is neither. And the degree of attention this case got, there was some stringer for the New York Times covering this case down in Cincinnati, and apparently his hearing was about as good as mine is now, because in the front page of the New York Times the next morning I was quoted as saying that Mr. Hanna is a heathen. But he survived it, and we survived the case. But at any rate, as I said, the body had never been found, and the suspicion was that the doctor disposed of it in an incinerator at the hospital, but there was no proof, and they did a lot of investigating, trying to come up with a body, because it helps to have a body when you're trying a murder case, but they never did find the poor kid's remains. So, but anyway, in cross-examination, Bobby is saying, "Well, did you talk to them?" No, these are all of the people that were on the defense witness list. Did you talk to this? No. Did you talk to? No. Instead of stopping there, he said, "Well, Lieutenant, what did you do?" You can imagine, after about 10 minutes, Bobby finally got up and and I gave the classic Jerry Gold line, "You open the door." But at one point I did stop him, but it's an example of asking one question too many, or quit when you're ahead. And again, this is still my first year. Next, I got another present from my friend Francis Sweeney. There had been a cop killing, another cop killing. There were 4 gangbangers, and Francis was assigned the case, and he tried 3 of them separately, of course. And at that point, he was tired. He told Leo Spellis, he was our administrative judge. And he says, you know, the shooter's coming up next. I've had enough. Can you give this to somebody else? Yeah. Well, they claim that Leo just pulled a ticket off. Anyway, it came to me. So this was a terrible case too. The lieutenant, well, let's back up. 2 weeks before, these guys had tried to rob this Blonder's store, and they screwed up. They had a run and didn't get anything. So and then they hit another Blonder's store, and same ammo, same description, and so forth. So this poor lieutenant from the Maple Heights Police Department came back to the first store. Well, guess who else came back to that store about 20 minutes ahead of him? These same 4 thieves. And when they see the police car pull up, they said, shut up, act like nothing happened. So here's this poor policeman. He's talking to the guy behind the desk, and he says, have you seen any of these guys? We're trying to figure out who was here. Well, he didn't finish the sentence because Michael Mance came up from behind him and executed him. Having a nice year, Harry? So actually it went to trial, and he was found guilty. And you know, when you're a politician and running for office and they ask you, what do you think about the death penalty, it's easy to be a conservative. But when it's your signature and your voice, it's a little harder. Excuse me, it's still hard. But I got it out, and fortunately that statute was declared unconstitutional, so he did die in prison, but he was not executed over my signature. So that was the first year. A year spent in the headlines on the 11 o'clock news. And if that wasn't enough, the next year, now I got to stand for election for the rest of John Patton's term in 1978. Late summer, end of August, there's a school strike in Cleveland. 100,000 kids are out of school. Yeah, you guessed who got it. And we negotiated day and night and weekends. The only exception, Billy Petro was representing the school board. I did let him go to a Browns game one Sunday. So we stopped negotiating at 12:30 that day. Finally, there was a little break in the action. Oh, well, speaking of the public, I forgot about this. I had a lot of jokes about this. You know, naturally, I ordered them back to work, and not everybody, the school board wanted me to hold them in contempt for, not honoring the back to work order. And I said, well, you see, the president of the teachers union is Mr. O'Mara. You may call him James, but since his son James was a year ahead of me at St. Thomas Aquinas, and I used to see him at Mass every Sunday. He was Mr. O'Mara then, and he's Mr. O'Mara now. And if you think I'm going to put Mr. O'Mara in jail, you got the wrong guy. You can ask to have me recused if you want to. I don't care. It wouldn't bother me in the least. But I'm not putting Mr. O'Mara behind bars. And finally, there was a breakthrough. And before it was presented to the teachers, both sides came in and said, Judge, we'd like to have you impose a gag order. It's been the history, and these were experienced labor negotiators, it's been our history that if the leadership has the chance to present this proposal with everybody involved there, it has a lot better chance of succeeding. I said, oh, okay, I understand, so I imposed a gag order. And unfortunately, some slimeball reporter, who of course knew about the gag order because it was sitting right there when it was imposed on the record, found one person in the negotiating team that wasn't apprised of the gag order. And so this person told him what the terms were, and they were in the Cleveland Press rag that night, and needless to say, the antis had their way, and the proposal was not accepted. So we go back to the table for another week while these kids are not in school, and I'm not getting home. As a matter of fact, at one point, we were going till, night. And we were a one-car family, and so I called my wife and I said, I just don't want to walk up the street to the damn rapid, and I just don't want to. Would you mind picking me up? She said, no problem. So she drove down, and my sister was over, so she helped take care of the 4 older kids, but for some reason she put Bridget, the youngest, who was not quite 2. And she'd been the one my wife did most of the work, obviously, but I was the one who was putting Bridget to bed at night, And so I got in the car, and she jumps up and she grabs me, and she won't let go. And it dawned on me that she hadn't seen me for a month. Well, at any rate, Governor Rhodes, who really did understand state government, he found some money in the workers' comp fund to sweeten the deal, and a week later, now it's the middle of October, and these kids are just getting back to school. Of course, it's also 3 weeks before the election, and whoever my opponent was had about as much chance as I had against Charlie Vannick 2 years before, because the public must have thought I was the only common pleas judge, according to the newspaper. Anyway, that's how I got started, and that's how I got continued. And as Nikki said, not long after this, we did sell the lawyer house in Shaker Heights and bought a judge house in University Heights for about half the price, and we're still there almost 40 years later. But that was an interesting time. But now I had some other experiences from those general division days that are not quite as certainly not newsworthy. One of them involved theft. Lady had her house burgled and lost a TV set and something else, and she was sure that her son did it with one of those no accounts that he was running around with. Damn druggies. So the son and the other kid were charged, and came to me, and well, the state had a witness who said that he lived right behind him on Glendale in East Cleveland, and he was looking out one day, and I seen whatever the kid's name was, I forget now, him backing out of the window on a ladder, and he had a TV in his hand. Well, now they had waived the jury, so I didn't have any trouble finding him guilty. And it wasn't his first rodeo, so I did give him some time, but I sent him the workhouse. I don't know if it's still available as a less than penitentiary lodging or not, but back in those days it was sort of an intermediate gesture that you're not getting off with straight probation, but we'll keep you close to home. So anyway, I sent the kid to the workhouse for 6 months. The next couple of weeks later, the co-defendant said, "Now, he ain't gonna be dumb enough to waive a jury with that guy." So, trial, public defender, Timothy E. McMonigal at the controls. Well, Tim went out to Glendale, and he stood on the back porch. And there is no way he could have seen this woman's house from where he said he was. I had convicted an innocent man because the lawyers didn't do their job. The public defender did his job, and obviously the jury acquitted this guy. He also had, this was kind of, well, funny, because I still see the lawyer now and then. He went out in the hallway and asked a friend of his, black man, a lawyer, "Would you sit at the table next to me for a couple of minutes?" "Sure." This is on a recess, so we come back in, and Wiley's sitting next to Tim at the table, and the prosecutor says, "Can you identify the man that you saw take the TV from Leroy?" "Yeah, it's sitting right there." He identified a lawyer. The defendant was sitting in the back of the courtroom. So obviously the jury didn't have any trouble acquitting him, and I could not wait fast enough to undo the harm that I had done by bringing this kid back and acquitting him and sending him on his way. I guess the moral is, if you're going to take signed cases, you better do it with the same zeal that the public defenders approach every case, because your oath requires it. In another case that didn't make, well, yeah, this one did make the papers. Another murder case, East Pleas. Guy is sued for divorce by his wife. After he served papers, he's still in the house. He takes a gun and executes his 3 sons while they are asleep in bed, and goes down to the Greyhound station and takes a bus to Las Vegas. Well, he didn't get to Las Vegas, and he was brought back, and this case wasn't assigned to me. It was assigned to another judge. And I was chosen as a part of a 3-judge panel. So the only, as the lawyers openly said, all we're trying to do is, save his life. They must have been thinking, well, hell, Hanna, no, this guy's got to be nuts. Well, there was no testimony about this man's mental health. None. So we're deliberating, and you know, I could feel the eyes on me. And I said, well, look, you know, the statute says only if there is mitigating evidence. There isn't any mitigating evidence. You know, they can argue, well, he must have been crazy because who the hell would do this? Yeah, but give us some evidence. The prosecutor said it was just hateful revenge. And there's no evidence of mental health. So we pulled the trigger. Years, I mean years later, he's still in death row. Haven't gone up and down, I suppose. Well, anyway, the federal defender somehow gets involved. This is only a couple of years ago. I've forgotten this man's name, and I think it's a mental block. I think it's on purpose that I've forgotten his name. I can still remember the kids went to Chambers Elementary School, and my friend Joey Whalen had been the principal there and got a presidential commendation for turning a bankrupt, intellectually bankrupt school into a gem, one of the best in the state of Ohio. But I don't remember the man's name that pulled the trigger. At any rate, the federal defender did unearth witnesses, even after all these years, people that worked with him, other family members, even the ex-wife, and they were talking about voices that he heard and aberrational behavior that he exhibited on the job and so forth, which, if we had heard that, would have come up with a different sentence. Maybe not NG by reason of, but certainly a life sentence rather than a death sentence. And the federal defender was in the process of getting something for the parole board in the hopes that they would recommend clemency. And I went down and testified at the parole board at their request and pleaded with them that had we known this, it would not have been a death sentence. Well, you can guess what the result of that was. And I even wrote a personal letter to John Kasich. And you can guess what happened to that circular file. He was executed. And if there's any lesson to be learned, it is that mistakes happen when you don't have all the information. So if you take assigned cases, you better show the zeal of the public defender, because your oath requires it. Now, the case that made a lawyer out of me, it became clear after a few years that the salary was not commensurate with the needs. My wife takes care of all the money, and I think she kind of, well, I know she got together with her friend Ann Hammer, whose husband Dan was a partner at Thompson Hanna, and good friends. We used to go on trips to the Sixth Circuit Conference together. And so Dan had approached me about joining Thompson Hine, and I almost did it, but then it occurred to me that I had just granted a summary judgment on behalf of Bill Wallace, who was the managing partner at Thompson Hine, in it's kind of a tough case. The idea of something more than workers' comp benefits for an injured employee was just developing. It hadn't really come full circle, but there was the beginnings anyway of the intentional tort claims against employers, but this was in the embryonic stage, and you know, they had moved for a summary judgment, and we're talking, you know, at a pretrial, and I said to Bill, I said, look, you know, the Court of Appeals is run by a bunch of 24-year-olds that think everybody's entitled to have their trial by jury. Plaintiff has to go to the jury, you know, so why should I'm not going to grant the motion. Let's just go to trial next month. Well, and a day later I got a phone call from Bill with the other guy on the line, and he's telling me about all the, you know, the expenses of the trial and so forth, and would you really take a look at it? And I said, yeah, okay. So, of course, they had a stack of stuff like that. And I actually had to I had to go across the street where the dead files were, because there was a deposition of this. The victim was an Irish guy who got blown up in the Erie View Tower. It's a job that, you know, Kevin Spellis had a summer job at, so I knew about the incident when it happened. Well, anyway, I read the deposition of the boss, and geez, you could almost hear the brogue in the guys coming off the page, you know, another Irishman. But it just didn't cut it, and so I wound up granting the motion for summary judgment. Eventually, I was sustained in the Supreme Court of Ohio, you know. But at any rate, I thought, nah, this wouldn't look good, because the lawyer on the other side might go to the papers, and it might get a mess. Nah, thanks anyway, but I'm going to stay on. Well, the next year, this is the case that made me a lawyer. It's a rape case. The victim is a 21-year-old cub reporter for the Plain Dealer, who was assigned to interview people who were putting on a play at the Eldred Theater, Western Reserve University, where I went to law school. Not Case Western Reserve School of Law. And the Eldred Theater, Western Reserve, Franklin Backus School of Law, sir. At any rate, the Eldred Theater also had a little coffee shop that a lot of us went over there. And so I knew the lay of the land, so to speak. Anyway, this poor girl is early for her appointment, unfortunately. Roaming the campus was a fellow that was all of 5 days out of prison for the crime of rape. And he wanders into Eldred Theater, and she became his next victim. So it comes to trial, and I'm the lucky judge again, and it did, you know, it required a trial because she did not have, of course she was scared to death. Her ID was not very positive, except for one thing. David, tattooed on his neck. Well, that was enough to convict him. And during the case, I said, Jesus, is this what my life is going to, is this what I worked so hard for? To give this piece of garbage a fair trial? And I said to myself, yes, anal aperture. That is exactly your job. So shut up and do it. So we gave him a fair trial. It must have been a fair trial because he stayed in prison long enough to die some 18 years later. But after that case, I walked out of the building. The young woman was sitting outside, and I went over to her and I said, I'm sorry for your trouble. I will tell you this, I have just written my first letter to the parole board, and it reads something like this. You made a mistake granting this man his freedom. If you make that same mistake, the blood is on your hands, not mine. And I turned around and walked up and asked Bill Wallace, when do I start? And that was the end of my general jurisdiction tenure. Again, I'll leave you. Well, one civil case. Talk about the world with a little note nor long. Remember what the Irishman and the audience will. That reminds me about the only funny story I got from the bench a couple of years ago. We're in trial, and juror number 4, phone rings. She reaches in her purse. Oh, she picks up the phone, starts talking, and starts walking right out of the courtroom. Are you kidding me? Well, needless to say, she kept on walking, and the alternate stepped down and took her chair. But another civil case. This was a gift. Wasn't this Seamus's room?
No, 23.
That's right, he was up. That's right. Oh, only the top floor would do for James Patrick Thomas Gilbane. Yes.
23.
Yes. Anyway, this was another gift from another one of my Irish friends in Leo Spellici. Seamus claimed to know somebody involved in the case, so we gave it to Leo, and Leo gave it to Harry. It was a partition case, arguing over who should get this house on Train Avenue. Not exactly a neighborhood of palaces. Anyway, I forget the names of the people, but you'll soon know their ancestry anyway. So after 2 days of bitter diatribe, claims of false documents, forged signatures, etc., I said, okay, today is, well, wait, first of all, look, there isn't anybody in this courtroom that doesn't come of a people born to mud-walled cabins, dirt floors, and thatched roofs. And the only heat came from a peat fire. And if the heat wasn't enough, you depended upon the warm embrace of a sibling or a parent to get through a chilly night. And now we get over here. Ooh, we've got slate roofs. We've got running water. We've got gas heat. We've got brick houses. And we squabble over who gets Mom's house. Well, today's October 26th. The plaintiff has a month to put your brief in. And then you have a month to put your brief in. And that will take us to December 26th. And if you pass the anniversary of the birth of the Prince of Peace without making peace, then the stranger, I, will determine who gets Ma's house. Well, of course, the younger generation in the back, they're all weeping, you know, the teenagers and the 20-somethings. The 50-somethings are like this. And 60 days later, the stranger said, I'm not going to tell you who gets Ma's house. You're going to figure it out yourselves. And I refuse to decide the case. Well, I guess that worked, because I didn't hear anything more from them. But it was a shame to be talking to some of your own like that, but they deserve it. So the only thing I can tell you that from a judicial point of view, the judge has got to be indifferent to the outcome, which means sometimes you have to grant motions that you don't like, and overrule some that you do like. But the rule of law has to triumph over the judge's whim. And I'll close with a biblical thought. One of David's Psalms says, "The Lord hears the cry of the poor." Well, as advocates or as judges, we damn well better hear the cry of the poor as well. Thank you for your time.